Christmas in Chicago is usually beautiful. But this year, a blizzard was burying the city under 2 feet of ice, inside my $850,000 penthouse. The air was even colder. We hadn't even finished the turkey when my mother, Cynthia, slammed a heavy roll of architectural blueprints onto the dining table. They weren't plans for her house. They were for mine. My father, Richard, didn't look up from his plate as he announced, "We're knocking down the south wall on Monday. Princess needs a studio for her content." They didn't ask. They informed me. Across the table, my sister was already critiquing my lighting. The audacity was absolute. I froze, my hand tightening around the carving knife. Have you ever had a family member act like they own the life you built from scratch? Tell me in the comments, I need to know. I'm not the only one. I stepped out onto the balcony, the glass door sliding shut behind me and muffling the sound of their excitement. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, a sub-zero knife that cut right through my silk blouse. But I welcomed it. It felt honest. Inside, my family was warm, fed, and busy planning how to dismantle my life. Outside, the city was a frozen wasteland. It was fitting, you see. In my family, weather isn't just weather. It is destiny. The story had been told so many times it had become scripture. I was born during the Great Blizzard of '92, a night so violent it knocked out the hospital's power grid. My mother, Cynthia, shivered in the dark for 12 hours without an epidural. My father, Richard, missed a critical business meeting because his car was buried under 4 feet of snow. From my very first breath, I was the inconvenience. I was the storm child, the harbinger of bad luck and struggle. 3 years later, my sister was born on a Tuesday morning in May. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. A local news crew just happened to be filming a segment on spring miracles in the maternity ward. And for 15 glorious seconds, her newborn face was broadcast across the state. They named her Princess. Not ironically, but literally. To my parents, the universe had spoken. She was the sun child, destined for fame, ease, and adoration. I was the dark cloud that had to be tolerated. She was the light that had to be worshipped. That superstition didn't just color our childhoods, it dictated them. When Princess failed a test, it was the teacher's fault for dimming her shine. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected after all. I had to work hard to overcome my natural disadvantage. I spent 30 years trying to outrun a label. They called me a disaster. So, I became a fortress. I built this career, this wealth, this reputation not just because I wanted to, but because I had to survive the narrative they wrote for me. I worked 80-hour weeks, clawed my way up from junior copywriter to creative director, and saved every penny while my sister drifted from one failed influencer venture to another. Funded entirely by my parents' retirement savings, I looked back through the glass. Princess was holding court at the head of the table, gesturing wildly with a wine glass I had bought in Italy. She had never held a job for longer than 3 months. Yet she walked through the world with the confidence of someone who owned it. And, in a way, she did, because my parents ensured the world bent to her, standing there, watching the snow swirl around the skyscrapers I now helped design. The invisible chain that had bound me for decades finally snapped into focus. I realized that to them, my success wasn't proof of my resilience. It was an error, a cosmic mistake where the lucky resources had accidentally ended up with the unlucky child. They didn't feel guilty about taking my loft because they didn't believe it was truly mine. In their twisted, superstitious logic, Taking my home wasn't theft. It was a correction. They were simply restoring the natural order where the sun child shines and the storm child exists, only to be harvested. I finished my wine in one swallow. The cold had numbed my fingers. But my mind was finally terrifyingly clear. If they thought I was a storm, I decided right then and there that I wouldn't disappoint them. I would show them exactly what a storm could do. I slid the glass door open and stepped back into the warmth of the penthouse. The transition was jarring from the honest, biting wind of the Chicago winter to the suffocating, perfumed heat of my family's delusion. I walked back to the dining table, where my mother had already uncapped a red marker and was drawing thick, violent lines across the blueprints of my living room. "So," I asked, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm inside me, "if you knock down the south wall and give Princess the master suite for her studio, where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" Cynthia didn't even look up. She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "The storage room off the kitchen has heat." "April, it's cozy. We can fit a twin mattress in there if we clear out your winter coats." I stared at her. The storage room. A windowless 6 by 8 foot box where I kept my vacuum cleaner and holiday decorations. A space so small, the door couldn't even open fully if a bed was inside. "You want me to live in a closet," I said, testing the weight of the words. "In the home I bought while paying the mortgage." "Oh, stop being dramatic." My father, Richard, chimed in, pouring himself another glass of my expensive Cabernet. "You're at the office 14 hours a day anyway. You don't need a view to sleep. Princess needs that southern exposure for her lighting. It's critical for her brand. Think of it as an investment in the family's future." Princess looked up from her phone, her nose wrinkling as she scanned the high ceilings of my loft. "Honestly, April, Richard is right. Plus, the energy in here is really heavy, stagnant. I'm going to have to smudge the whole place with sage and bring in some crystals before I can even think about creating content here. It feels blocked, like you." She said it with such casual disdain, picking at a hangnail while discussing the erasure of my existence in my own home. And that was the moment the final lock in my chest clicked open. I looked at their faces. There was no malice. There was no secret. Villainous twisting of mustaches. There was only a terrifying, bland earnestness. And that was the horror of it. This wasn't simple greed. This was the trap of normalized cruelty. Over 3 decades, they had constructed a reality where my suffering was not just acceptable, it was the necessary fuel for their engine. They didn't feel guilt about displacing me because, in their minds, I wasn't a person with rights. I was a resource. I was the supporting beam that held up the Temple of Princess. And beams don't get to complain about the weight. They genuinely believed that shoving me into a closet to make room for her ring light was a logical, even righteous, act of parenting. You cannot argue with insanity. You cannot negotiate with people who believe your sacrifice is their birthright. If I screamed, if I cried, if I showed them the deed to the house, they would just look at me with confusion and call me selfish for stalling destiny. "I see," I said, and the coldness from the balcony settled deep into my bones. "I think I'm going to be sick. Excuse me." "Hurry back," Mom said, drawing a giant red X through the wall I had painted by hand the day I moved in. "We need to discuss the color palette. This gray is too depressing for a brand launch." I turned and walked toward the hallway. Not to the storage room, but to the guest bathroom. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the cold marble. I didn't vomit. I didn't cry. I looked at myself in the mirror, at the storm child, staring back. And I realized they were right about one thing. The energy in this house was about to change. I splashed freezing water on my face. But the heat in my veins wouldn't die down. It wasn't rage anymore. It was something sharper, colder. It was strategy. For 30 years, I had fought against the label they gave me. I had tried to prove I was sunny, compliant, easy. But standing there, staring at the reflection of a woman who had just been told to sleep in a storage closet, I realized the futility of it. They would never see me as anything but a disaster waiting to be managed. So I decided to stop fighting. If they wanted a storm, I would give them a hurricane. I pulled out my phone and scrolled past the endless notifications from work until I found a contact I hadn't touched in 2 years, Kelsey. To the rest of the world. Kelsey was a ruthless real estate shark who bought distressed properties for cash and flipped them without mercy. But to me, she was something far more valuable, the enemy of my enemy. 2 years ago, Kelsey had been Princess's talent manager. She had worked tirelessly to get my sister brand deals, only for Princess to fire her publicly, accusing Kelsey of stealing commissions and sabotaging her career. Princess had posted a tearful, lying video that went viral, destroying Kelsey's reputation in the industry. Kelsey had sued for defamation and won, but the damage was done. She had pivoted to real estate, nursing a grudge that was cold, hard, and waiting for a spark. I hit call. It rang twice. April. Her voice was clipped. Suspicious. "Why are you calling me on Christmas?" "Do you still want to buy the building?" I whispered. My eyes locked on the bathroom door. "I remember you made an offer on the penthouse last year." "I'm listening." "I'll sell it to you. The penthouse. Today." "You're not serious." "I am. But there are conditions. I'll sell it to you for 20% under market value. 500, 20,000. All cash. We close in 5 days." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. That was a steal. In this market, in this neighborhood, it was robbery. What's the catch? April, is the foundation cracking? No. The catch is the closing date. You take possession on January 1st, and on that day, you have to personally evict whoever is inside. Whoever is inside, Kelsey paused, and then I heard the smile in her voice. Sharp as a razor. Let me guess. The princess. She thinks she's moving in on New Year's Day. My parents are planning to knock down walls. They think I'm giving it to her. Silence stretched for a heartbeat. And then Kelsey laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the sound of a predator spotting wounded prey. April. Honey. For a 20% discount and the chance to throw your sister out into the snow, I would have paid you. Good, I said. Send the contract to my personal email. I'll sign it tonight after they leave. Done. Merry Christmas. April. Merry Christmas. Kelsey. I hung up and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back wasn't the storm child anymore. She was the eye of the hurricane. Calm. Center. Deadly. I fixed my lipstick, smoothed my silk blouse, and unlocked the door. It was time to go back out there and give the performance of my life. I returned to the living room wearing a smile that looked convincing but felt hollow. My mother was already planning a neon Princess Vibes sign. My father estimating demolition costs. They looked irritated that I'd interrupted their fantasy. I'm sorry, I said softly. You're right. I've been selfish. I pulled a spare key from my purse, one I deactivated months ago, and handed it to Princess. For the movers, I said. She grabbed it without thanks. Already scanning for selfie angles. Finally. I'll move my things to storage next week. I lied, watching her tuck the useless key into her bag. Clearly, this is your destiny. My mother teared up. I knew you'd accept your role. My father nodded. Good girl. We'll handle the renovations. They toasted with my wine, celebrating a victory that was actually a trap. As they argued over curtains, I noticed an envelope sticking out of my father's briefcase. Red stamp. Final notice. When I checked public records in the kitchen, my blood ran cold. 6 months earlier, they'd taken out a predatory second mortgage on their paid-off house. The beneficiary, Princess Inc. There were more loans co-signed. Reckless. Desperate. They were months from foreclosure. That's when I understood. This wasn't about giving Princess space. They planned to force me to sign over the loft and mortgage my home to save themselves. They were going to drag me into their bankruptcy. Any guilt I'd felt vanished. They weren't family. They were parasites. On January 1st, a blizzard buried Chicago. From my hotel near O'Hare, I watched the live security feed. At exactly 1000 a.m., they arrived my parents' car, Princess's SUV, a moving truck. Princess filmed a vlog as she approached the door. She entered the code. Nothing. Tried the key. Nothing. Panic set in. Then the door opened. Not for them. Kelsey stood inside, calm, holding a mug of tea and a document folder. This is private property, she said. April sold it to me last week. The silence was brutal. My mother dropped the champagne. Princess screamed. My father threatened her with a sledgehammer. Before you do that, Kelsey said coolly, holding up a paper. You might want to check your own address. It was their foreclosure notice. You didn't come to move in, she continued. You came to steal her equity because you're broke. The bank owns your house. I own this one. She closed the door. I shut off the feed, powered down my phone, and walked into the first-class lounge. Champagne, I said. The good stuff. My flight to Tokyo boarded in 2 hours. New job. New life. No baggage. I turned my phone on once, 98 missed calls, then blocked every number. Family isn't sacred by default. Love is a choice. Respect is earned. And survival is not betrayal. They called me the storm child like it was an insult. But storms don't destroy without purpose. They clear rot. They reset the ground. I wasn't the disaster. I was the cleansing. I walked to the gate, leaving them frozen in the wreckage of their own greed. I am April. I am the storm. And for the first time, the forecast is mine.